So I got to see an early screening of Power Rangers, the 2017 adaptation of the 1990s television show Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which is actually an adaptation of the 16th Super Sentai series Kyoryu Sentai Jurenja. And when we were younger, we had no idea, well, most of us had no idea that it was from Japan until we grew up and figured it out. But regardless of that, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was the biggest freaking thing in the early 90s. I mean, if you were a kid in the early 90s, there's a very good chance that you were into Power Rangers. And now with 2017, we have a brand new reboot of the franchise. This is a brand new story. So one thing you should know ahead of time before going into this film is that this film does not tie in with any Mighty Morphin Power Rangers seasons or with Kyoryu Sentai Jurenja at all. There's no tie-in. It's a different universe altogether, completely recreated from scratch, but there are several references to Power Rangers. There were actually many references, and the characters, of course, all have, well, the same name. You have Zordon, you have Alpha, you have Rita Repulsa, you have Goldar, you have Zach, Trini, Kimberly, Billy, and Jason, but they are, of course, reimaginings, complete reimaginings of the original first season characters. And there are several references to events that happen in the series, but they've, of course, been reimagined for this movie, especially when it comes to Zordon and Rita Repulsa. Now, the thing about this movie is for months after seeing the toys and the trailers, I was thinking this movie was gonna suck, and guess what? It did not suck. I was pleasantly surprised by this movie, and I knew ahead of time that if I went into this movie expecting it to be just a popcorn flick, I would enjoy it more, but actually, there were a lot of pretty interesting themes explored in this movie that I was not expecting. And also, again, guys, if you're gonna get into this movie and try to compare it to the Sentai or the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, you're wasting your time. Like, as far as, you know, story goes and things like that, I mean, you can make comparisons because obviously it's the same kind of thing, but if you're gonna try and sit there and say, well, it's not gonna be as good as the original, you have to get that out of your head. This is a reimagined universe for Power Rangers, and like I said, there was good and there was bad, but really, I had a fun time watching this movie. This movie was fun. Now, here's the thing. Power Rangers, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, has always been a family-friendly thing, to the point where it's almost cheesy. If you were out there and you watched the first season of Power Rangers, you remember the PSAs they would have, you remember the constant, you know, hammering over your head, you know, get good grades, exercise, you know, that kind of after school special type of thing where they really, you know, these Rangers back then were perfect. They had no flaws. They could play every sport. This movie is completely different. This movie was pretty much made for people who grew up with Power Rangers and who wanted a different kind of Power Ranger story. If you're looking for a squeaky clean, you know, super homogenized version of Super Sentai or Power Rangers, you're not going to get it here, folks. The movie has a lot of dark moments. It has tons of dark imagery. There are character themes explored. There are arcs with these characters. There's death in the film and profanity. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Well, that's not the Power Rangers I want. Power Rangers should be fun. It should be, you know, comedic. It should be wacky. The movie gives you that because it doesn't take itself too seriously. There are moments where it does and there are moments where it doesn't. But I think with this movie, Dean Israelite, which is kind of funny because Saban is also from Israel, so it's kind of ironic that they, you know, work together on this movie. He creates this different kind of world, but he manages to actually balance out the serious stuff with the comedic stuff. You know, I actually thought he did a really good job of this, and I was not expecting that coming into this movie. I really wasn't. This movie is not just better, but significantly better than both of the 90s Power Rangers movie. The last time we had a theatrical Power Rangers movie was that Turbo movie, and it was a piece of crap. And then the one before it hasn't really aged very well. I liked it when I was a kid, but it really hasn't aged very, very well. This movie's better than both of them. And the one thing that this movie does differently than Power Rangers and Super Sentai, in my opinion, is that because it's a movie, they had to be careful with how they timed everything out. And as a result of that, you have a lot of character development for the first 2 acts of the movie. This is not like the original Power Rangers movies when you had the established TV show and you already knew who the characters were. Even though the first MMPR movie was non-canon, and the second one was, of course, the bridge between Zeo and Turbo, with those movies, you still knew who Tommy and Kimberly and all these, Aisha, you knew who they were. Here you have the 5 characters like the previous characters in name only with a little bit of similarities. For example, Billy is a nerd in this movie like he was in the TV show, but that's where it ends. You have Kimberly, who is a character that has so much, she's guilt-ridden over something that I felt was kind of stupid, honestly. I thought it was really stupid, but no spoilers on that one. You have Trini, who is very, she has trouble at home. She has issues with her family not accepting her for who she is, which, again, they alluded to something very interesting in the film. They didn't outright say that she was bisexual or a lesbian, but it was, I guess, hinted at in a way. A very modern kind of situation here for this character. Then you have Zach, who's kind of this crazy daredevil guy. And then, just a guy who doesn't care about anything. And then you have Jason, who is vastly different from the original MMPR. The original Jason from the 90s TV show was a martial artist. He was a fearless leader. He was, a guy who was a jock, pretty much, right? This Jason, though, he's a bit of a rebel. He has legal problems, but he's still a guy who wants to do the right thing. Now, I thought the characters, they had a lot of, build up and progression. We didn't really see them use their powers as far as transforming until the 3rd act. But in this version of the story, the powers were inside of them. They were, it wasn't like they could only use their power when they were morphed. They actually had super strength and super speed, unmorphed. Now, some people are going to have a problem with that because it didn't happen in Power Rangers. Well, guess what, honey? That kind of stuff happened all the time in Super Sentai. So if you're out there and you're one of those elitists who constantly thinks that Sentai is better than MMPR and just is always just thumbing their nose up at this movie, they borrowed a lot of things from Super Sentai. In fact, there's a joke made near the end of the film. It's not really a spoiler, but there's a joke made about the Yellow Ranger. And the differences between the American Trini and the Japanese boy. And I'm not saying the word boy as in male. I'm saying the character's name was Boy. If you know that, you get what the joke is. The joke was actually made in the movie. Now, again, they get their powers, and it's kind of they have to figure out how to work together and find themselves, and it takes a tragedy for them to really come together as a unit, and that becomes really the story of the movie, is them coming together. So the problem with that, though, is that I felt that it took a little bit too long to get to the stuff that we wanted. Because I'm not going to lie, when I pay for a Power Rangers movie, and I didn't pay for this movie, but if I did, I would want action sprinkled around a little bit more. I didn't think there was enough of it, but as a fan of good storytelling, the character development was really, really, really leagues above most Power Rangers stories. Obviously, they don't have a 30 or 40 episode season to flesh out these characters. They had to cram it all into the first 2 acts and did a pretty good job of it. There were some things in the movie that I thought were a little bit, like it had me scratching my head. Certain things that I thought were, I don't want to say unrealistic because it's Power Rangers, but I want to say things that just felt a little bit out of place. And there was some wonky editing in the 2nd act. I thought that was a problem. I didn't like that. But I did like the fact that the movie took a different tone. And I'm telling you, I was dreading this because Power Rangers shouldn't be this like ultra violent thing. And this was not that. This retained enough seriousness, but it also had enough comedy. For example, the quest in the story, again, very light spoilers here, is that Rita wants the Zeo Crystal. And when you find out the location of the Zeo Crystal, it puts a smile on your faces of how wacky it is, and it's just straight out of Japan. Now, the thing about the suits resembling Iron Man, what I love about the movie is that they actually address this. There's a scene where Billy talks about how he's not sure if they're, Spider-Man or Iron Man, because they have these powers as if they were bitten by a radioactive spider. Then they have, of course, the morphed suits. So it's almost like they knew they were going to get that criticism, and so they put it in the movie. And I like that. I thought that was very smart of Dean Israelite to do, and the whole crew over there at Saban. Now, again, I enjoyed this movie. Wasn't perfect. I thought it took too long to get to the stuff that mattered to me. I felt they could have shaved a little bit in the middle, honestly. The finale, now, again, without going into spoilers, if you've watched an episode of Power Rangers, you know exactly how this goes. This is not a spoiler. You know how these fights go in Power Rangers, okay? You know they have the ground fight, then they have the Zord fight. It's in the trailer. It's not really a spoiler. The Zords, I did not like. Way too much bad CGI. It just looked really crammed. It was like the Transformers movies where when you have a big action scene, it's hard to keep up because there's so much stuff going on and so much CGI and so many silver blocks and silver colors that it gives you a headache. That's how this was, and I did not like that. The monster they fought at the end of the film it did nothing for me. It was just like a whatever thing. I mean, I know why they did it. It was just a whatever thing. And the issue with the Megazord, I didn't like it. I did not like the design. I didn't like that they kind of robbed us of actually seeing the transformation. Because the way they did it, I'm not going to spoil it, but you don't really see it. I didn't like that. I really didn't. As far as music goes, though, there was a scene where they did play the iconic Mighty Morphin Power Rangers music, which I loved. I totally fell in love with that scene. Totally felt the way it should have. Also, surprisingly enough, the Rangers were not as equipped as they were in the original series, or even in the movie. They didn't have as many weapons, but I think that what they might be doing is they might be holding off on these weapons for a future sequel if this movie does good, and I think it will do good. But what's interesting, again, is, like I said, this is not squeaky clean 90s, so not only are there, obvious mature tones, maybe not as mature as it would have been in the 90s. We live in a different world now. But also there was more violence and there was a couple of sex jokes. There was actually 3 instances in the film where there was sexual innuendo, but the sexual innuendo was not like obvious. So if you take like a 12-year-old kid or a 10-year-old kid to see this movie, he's probably not going to get it. But as an adult, you'll get it. I assure you of that. If you are an adult, which I'm pretty sure most of you guys are. So like I said, the film definitely addressed, things with with sexuality that I thought was very interesting. New things that aren't really native to Power Rangers. Most of the time they stay away from that kind of stuff because it is controversial to some. But like I said, we live in a new world. Now, as far as Rita Repulsa goes, Elizabeth Banks, look, all I'm going to say is this was like Poison Ivy from Batman and Robin. It really was. She is in a different movie. This movie tries to be serious, and yet I feel like the film really, with her, just comes off like a cheesy 80s movie. It's almost like she was stuck in 1993 still, Elizabeth Banks' performance. She just hammed it up and everything. But I really did like that when they're first introducing this character, when they're first kind of building her up, they totally took some stuff from The Exorcist and from The Ring. Like, she's built up like this kind of demonic horror, being, like almost like something out of a James Wan movie, and I really liked that. That was different. Bryan Cranston as Zordon, I thought he did a great job. I mean, there wasn't really much for him to do because he was just in a wall the whole time, but what he did was fine. There was a part in the movie where he had like a conflict with the Red Ranger. I thought that part was kind of like it could have been done better. I thought it was a little bit poorly written. They didn't really hammer home what the point was, and they had that typical thing that all these movies do where they jump to conclusions. You know how these superhero movies or any of these movies, you have the characters, in a situation where they don't hear the whole story and they're very stubborn, like, for example, Sam Jackson's character in Kong. Very similar to that here, and it is becoming a trope in movies I'm kind of sick of seeing, but that's just my opinion. Anyways, I like the movie. Is it the best movie in the world? Absolutely not. Is it going to change the world? Absolutely not. I put it right there with, I think it was better than G.I. Joe, both of them, the new movies, I mean. I think it was better than most of the new Transformers films, and I thought it was better than, I would probably say, I enjoyed it a little bit more than the Turtles movies, a little bit more. So they did a pretty good job. I mean, I put it right along that scale, that turtle scale of fun, but it ain't going to change the world. Thank you so much for watching this review of Power Rangers. Let me know what you thought down below. Of course, make sure you put spoiler warning if you have any spoilers. It's interesting, though, because if you've seen an episode of Power Rangers, the movie follows that formula. So it's just, other than the origin story, the fighting and things like that, very Power Rangers-esque, and they did capture the spirit of not just Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, but they definitely captured the spirit of Super Sentai. They really did. I got to give it to them. Thank you so very much. Talk to you guys later.